This episode is brought to you by Synchronicity because how I met this guest was total synchronicity. I was thinking about how to create your own rhythm, your own pace in this personal development space arena, and I met somebody who specializes in this space and so much more here in Lisbon, actually. So that is even more magical. And it's my pleasure to introduce to you to Rebecca Rinaldi. Hello, Rebecca.
Hey, Stas. How's it going?
It is going fantastic. Just still
Amazing.
still riding the wave.
I
Feels
love that. Love to
feels
hear it.
pretty good. So yeah, it's it's amazing how we met and how we expanded on this topic, how we connected. That looks like we're passionate about a very similar thing,
Yeah.
and as a lot of people are. But sometimes it could be quite overwhelming, the personal development space, and there's so much to do there. Um, so let's kind of simplify it today and make it more accessible to people so they don't feel overwhelmed.
Yeah, perfect. That's my favorite thing to do.
Perfect. And could you just tell us real quick, what is it you do, what you specialize in, to give us a
Yeah.
little taste?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm an empowerment coach. Essentially, I specialize in helping people give the middle finger to all of the societal, religious, cultural conditioning that they've been brought up with so that they can connect deeper into themselves and really, go out into the world as the person that they actually want to be and not the person that they've been conditioned to be. So that's really, in a nutshell, what I do.
I love it. That's perfect.
Yeah.
So, I mean, maybe I would love to start with your story because it is actually quite amazing that you kind of did the give the middle finger, right? And you decided to move to Lisbon, and you've been here for quite a few years, and you're from LA, and so that's so awesome how this happened, and you are finding your true self-expression and your,
Yeah.
what you're really talented in. So, how was it for you? Like maybe guide us through your internal process of when you were having this doubts, right? Like, oh, but I don't know this area, like what if I fail and there's
Yeah.
nobody there to really support, and so you really had to follow your guidance, your inner guidance, I assume, right? How did that go for you?
Yeah, so let me give you kind of a bird's eye view of my story. Because, yes, I am originally from Southern California, born and raised. And I hopped around a little bit, but essentially I was living a pretty traditional life. I was doing the whole go to college. I was going to school to be a lawyer. I wanted to be a human rights lawyer. And the first experience I have really with following that deep intuition that I have was when I was going to school to be a lawyer. And there was just something in me, even though that's something I always wanted to do my entire life. I mean, everything that I did leading up to college was to be a lawyer. And I was in my third year, and there was just something inside of me that was like, this isn't it. Like, this is not it. And I felt it so deep into my body. I'm like, wait a second. If this isn't it, then what is it? And I just started freaking out. And I just knew I had to listen to it. I didn't know where it was going to lead me. No clue, but I just knew I had to. And I did. And it took me down a very interesting path. So I ended up doing tech sales for a really long time. And very long story short, I got an opportunity to do a speaking engagement at for an old mentor of mine was doing this like event. Somebody had dropped out last minute, and she was like, "Can you fill in?" And I was like, "Absolutely." And I was on that stage, and it was for a group of women, and it was essentially on just being your authentic self. And I was like, there is nothing better than this. Like, I never felt so alive. I never felt so passionate. Never felt so connected to something before as I did when I was there. So I was like, okay, there's something here. And I started doing coaching kind of on the side. But again, limiting my own abilities there, I was like, but that's not a profession. That's like a side profession, right? So I started doing that on the side. And moral of the story is late 20s, I got this massive, again, just like I did when I was in college, feeling inside of me that was like, this still isn't it. So I did the whole like quit my 6-figure corporate job, company car, corporate credit card, the whole thing to do nothing. I was like, I'm just going to go travel. Like, I have this goal that I've always wanted to do, which is travel the world for a year. I'm just going to do it. If not now, when? And things will just, maybe I'll figure it out on the road. And I did. And then on the road, I just realized I'm like, every single person I encountered, every single person I was given the pleasure of sitting across from, I would just dive into their story. Like, who are you and how do you show up and what's going on for you and what brought you here? And it was just like this universal message for me that was like, well, this is it. Like, this is what you're supposed to be doing. So yeah, I started my coaching business full time 3 years ago and have like never looked back. So it was, and I never went back to the States. So it's been 4 years now. I traveled for the first 2.5 and then came to Lisbon a year and a half ago. My path just naturally led me here. And here we are, just been following that little intuitive voice ever since.
That's amazing. I love hearing stories like this because it just, it really shows how life can be different when you listen to that inner guidance. And it's very important to acknowledge, like, for example, something that held me back a lot is my interpretation of how this inner guidance should be. I always thought
Mhm.
that it should be a loud voice of saying, you need to go there and you need to do this, and then I
Like
will
the loud
follow.
voice of God or something, like
Exactly,
coming
exactly.
down in this booming thing. Yeah.
I must have watched like too many sci-fi movies, or I don't know where it came from, but and so I probably did have a lot of moments where this inner guidance was telling me like, hey, something is not right, like maybe you need to look a different direction. But because I
Mhm.
was expecting something else, I never really followed. And
Hmm.
then I think eventually I just realized, you know what, I need to create my own interpretation of this inner guidance, how, like, actually sit there and connect and create my own story of like, how do I connect with my higher self, how do I listen
Hmm.
to the intuition. How there is no like a very specific rule of how intuition works. It works differently for different people. And so I think it's very important to kind of maybe do some journaling, do some like connecting to yourself to understand like what are those little signals that we get, like what are the little symbols that we see, or little messages that there's like, oh, that was kind of funny how it just happened, I was just thinking about this and it just happened. Synchronicity, right? But it
Hmm.
happens for a reason, because it's kind of like your higher self is guiding you to directions you would normally not look at. And so that's, I think, the core message that I would love to emphasize here is create your own communication channel with
Yeah,
yourself, with your higher self, because only you know how it works. And
totally.
that's it.
Yeah, I love that. So, the way that I describe intuition is it's basically just your soul's inner compass, right? I mean, it's your soul's inner compass trying to guide you toward what I call your true north. And I use that phrase. People use a bunch of different phrases, but for me, your true north is essentially the place in which you are the most aligned with your core values, your purpose, your greater why, where everything basically like how you were designed to be finally starts puzzle piecing together, right? It fits together finally. And that's how I describe like what your true north is and what your intuition is essentially trying to lead you toward. It's giving you all of these little signals, all these little hints along the way trying to get you there. But it's really interesting, and especially I think in the last few years when we talk about intuition, is that it's almost become like a meme, right? Like this follow your gut, follow your instincts, follow your intuition, but we just kind of stop there and we don't talk about what that means. What does that look like? How does one do that? Right. Like, and also, I think something that's really important to talk about too when we talk about intuition is that, we need to learn to separate it from all of our trauma, our unhealed wounds, all of the conditioning that we've been brought up with, because those are all voices that are also speaking to us as well. And if we don't practice learning to decipher who's talking to us at what time and what version of us is speaking at what time, then we're just all going to think like, oh, well, that's just our intuition. It's like, no, that's just your childhood trauma that you haven't dealt with, trying to like fire up to protect you, really, because that's what our biases are, right? Our cognitive biases try to protect us from a slew of different things. So they tend to just want to keep us in the same exact place. So it's going to be like, well, that's just firing up actually to protect you, which is just keep you in kind of this mediocre zone. So I think it's really important to also have the conversation when we talk about intuition, also talk about all of the things that intuition are not, but that what it can easily sound like, you know?
That is really good. I'm so happy that you made that distinction because it's true. We do have a lot of voices that are speaking to us, and
Yeah,
sometimes we make decisions, you know, uh, not in a very conscious way. And it's not because our intuition decided to take over, be like, don't worry, I got this one. I'll just act on your behalf. Like, usually it's the conditioning that acts on our behalf.
absolutely. So, like what you were saying before, which is like we need to kind of cultivate our own communication channel with it's like ourselves to ourselves. It's like think about any other relationship that we have, right? Any relationship. If you don't practice communicating with that person or you never have conversations with that person, you're never going to get to know who they are, period. It's the same thing with ourselves. If we never have those conversations with ourselves, we're also never going to get to know what is the difference between our intuition and our trauma. How do we heal our trauma? What are our childhood wounds sound like when they're rearing their ugly head? It's like we have to practice that channeling within ourselves as well. It's so, so important.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the problem was having too much information, which is this is what's happening these days. There's so much information and so many different teachers and podcast shows like this one.
Yeah.
Just information, 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 and so there's a lot of like very valuable golden nuggets, but because of the amount of information that's out there in the ether, we miss the golden nuggets, unfortunately. And
Yeah.
so sometimes we feel like we actually know, like we use this very sophisticated expressions, and we can describe the situation so well, but we don't actually apply anything.
Hmm.
We don't actually like try this on and okay, this is how it actually feels. This is how like this is how it works within my body, right? So we can just sit there and describe it so eloquently, but not actually have the experience of how to deal with it and how to operate with this. So I think one of the things we touched on before this podcast is how to simplify this, how to not be overwhelmed by the tremendous amount of personal development work out there, and how to actually take these little bits and try them. I think that's going to get us a lot further than just like a hungry beast going for everything.
Yeah, totally. I think it's important to remember that, like, there is no person that ever won an Olympic medal that won an Olympic medal in one day, right? Like, they started very young, learning how to swim or, learning how to run, and they practiced and they practiced and they practiced and they got better and better and better. And then they could do longer distances and then they compete at a higher level. So I think it's important to remember that, like, if you're just starting on this journey, or even if you're middle way through, or even if you've been doing it for years, it's okay to remember that, like, you can pause, you can breathe, you can take a break, right? Like, you're not going to get to the end of any personal development journey ever. Right? Like, you're always going to be on that journey at some point.
Yeah, let's
So don't,
emphasize this point again because this is so important. There is no golden medal in the end. There is no like this
no.
eternal blissful state where I'm like, it's not like a retirement thing, where it's like, okay, you're 65, you're retired, now you officially cannot work. Like that work goes on for a very long
Exactly.
time.
Exactly. So I think, like, and one of the things you and I have also talked about is how important it is to just appreciate the place that you're in right now. If you're always striving to be more, do better, be kinder, be this, be that, you're always reading this book or listening to this podcast or consuming this information, what that does is it puts your life always outside of yourself. You're always striving for something and you never just exist. You never just are. And on the journey, like, what else are we doing this for if it's not just to enjoy our daily life, if it's not to just wake up and revel in the fact that we get to breathe and that we get to go outside and we get to do this thing called life in communion with hopefully other incredible people. So I think that it is incredibly important to continue on the journey, definitely, but also remember that, like, it's okay to just pause. It's okay to put down the book every once in a while. It's okay to push pause on the podcast every once in a while, like, it'll be there for you when you're ready, but then also just realize that, like, your life is meant to be lived now as you're also developing it to be better. Like, you can still celebrate wherever it is that you are in your journey today.
Exactly. I got this interesting thought right now when you were talking about like years ago, I watched this documentary. It's called Minimalism, and
Mm,
there's two guys that just decided to like give away all of their stuff, their furniture, and just really kind of make it a little bit more compact in terms of what they spend their energy, their time, their money on. And it was really amazing. It kind of triggered something in me, and I realized I was never really like into overconsumption, but there were still certain things that I found that I could benefit from that strategy. And as if you were talking, I was thinking, that would be really cool to apply this, to merge the concepts of minimalism and introduce it into personal development space,
mm,
and where less is more. Because
yeah,
right now, and this is not for everybody. There's some people, maybe they'll be, maybe this going to be the first podcast that they're listening to, or maybe they're just this year will start reading Eckhart Tolle books. Like, we don't know, everybody's starting at their own level, but I feel like eventually people will pick up the pace, even if they're just starting, because of the overwhelming amount of information. And so that would be a really good time to practice that minimalism approach, and maybe like read one book, and when you're done, just reread it again.
yeah,
Like, don't rush into the next book and a different author, or if you like the author, just read like few of his works or her works.
yeah,
And as the same with a podcast, like, find somebody that you trust their opinion, and just maybe like stick with them for some time. And also, a very good practice, just do nothing. Like, turn off all of the media,
right,
like social platforms, books. Just maybe have a journal, and if you feel like having that, like, just write and then read what you wrote. And
yeah,
I think that's a very powerful practice, because I did it last year and I experienced so much resistance. I continually had to do something, and I felt very unworthy of anything nice. If I didn't do anything, like, I would always think, well, did I actually contribute any value to the world? If
mm,
not, then shame on me. I don't deserve to have fun. And it doesn't really work like that.
yeah. I think the important thing is to take like a magnifying glass to your specific journey, to like learn how you're specifically wired and how you're specifically made. I know that you and I are both kind of like the classic overachievers, where we will just want to consume and learn and do and be better and be better and be better. So for people like us, I think pausing and taking a breath is it's an incredibly important message that we need to take hold of every once in a while, you know? But then I also think that there are the people that potentially like they'll just go their entire lives doing the same exact thing that they've always done. And maybe taking a breath is not actually what they need. Maybe it's, pushing their gear into overdrive and like really going for it. So I think that on the journey, like I would always tell people, like start with taking a big magnifying glass to everything about you, the way that you show up, the way that you think, your behaviors, who you were told to be, or do you even know that you were told to be anything? Because all of us have some sort of conditioning that we were brought up with, right? And a lot of people don't even take the time to question that. So when you start there and you start working backwards, then it's going to allow yourself to really be like, so then what do I need in this space on this journey for me to, you know, maybe it's just to be the best person I can be in my daily life for the people that are in my life. Maybe it's because you want to be a coach and you want to be able to influence a greater amount of people around you, whatever it is that your goal is, or whatever it is that that why is. It's like work backwards, unravel all of that, and then you're going to get a lot of clear answers about what that looks like for you. Do you need rest? Do you need to kick it into overdrive? Do you need a combination of the two? But I think it's always important to really make sure that you're checking in with yourself to be like, but where am I? And then what works for me on this, on this path, I guess.
Hmm. That's beautiful. Yeah, yeah. Checking in with yourself, because that answer is ready for you.
Yeah, I call it pulse checks. I literally
Pulse
call them pulse
checks,
checks.
nice.
Yeah, and the same way that you would for anything else, I say like take a pulse check. Like really check in with yourself. Like, how am I feeling? How am I showing up in the world today? What's my breath like? How's my body treating me? Do I have anything that I need to listen to? Like every 6 months, take a full scan pulse check of not just your internal system, but your external system as well. Our bodies are excellent at communicating things to us. We just sometimes have to give it this space and give ourselves the space to ask ourselves the questions so we can locate what our body is trying to tell us, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's true. That's that's beautiful. You know, I practice a lot of like daily rituals in the mornings. I try different things. So sometimes it's meditation, breath work, or I do stretching. And my recent one was I actually found this little bits of Abraham Hicks, and
Hmm.
so it's like little 10-minute episodes of from her conversations. And I was like, you know what? I'm gonna start my mornings like this now. Like while I'm still in bed, I'm going to listen to 10 minutes of this little piece here, and it's going to plant some good seeds, you know, and I'll start my day like this. So for the past couple of weeks, I've been doing that. And one of the recent ones was a really great one. It was, you know, Abraham Hicks is all about being into the vortex and operating only when you're in the vortex. A lot of people refer to it as flow state. I talk a lot about flow state. You know, I always seek flow state. I want to be in it because then everything makes sense. There's clarity. There is just things are happening at a very different pace. So for me, flow state, being in the vortex, is the same thing. And what she really emphasizes um, is that when you're in that space, then it's not about doing more. It's kind of like quality over quantity. It's not
Hmm.
about doing more things and then you become productive and you become successful at what you're doing. You could actually do less, but you're having that quality experience where each decision that you take, it's like it brings you 10 steps further than like a normal operational mode. And so sometimes it's very difficult to actually accept that because we feel so much pressure by others. I still um, get triggered sometimes when some of my friends are saying, oh yeah, I stayed up until 2 a.m. just like working on my things and I was like super productive. And I think to myself like, well, I went to bed at 11. Shame on me. I should have stayed up. I should have drank some coffee and just did more work. But no, it doesn't work this way, right? It's focus on maybe doing less, but doing things that get you into that really pumped state, and from there you'll get your great ideas. You'll write what you need to write. You close the deals that you need to close. Just get into that space first.
Yeah, I think that it's so cliche, right? But I can't remember who first said this, but like comparison is the thief of all joy.
Hmm.
And it's so true. And it's even more true, I think, in this space, because it's when you surround yourself with people that are like, also on the path of like they are really committed to personal development and self-growth, you're always going to have people that are quote unquote doing more. And I think that this really naturally leads into this whole toxic positivity movement, right? That like positivity and happiness is the end goal and the only goal. So it's like this idea, and it's so closely tied to perfectionism, isn't it? It's like perfectionism is happiness, and that's the end goal. That's it. So if you're happy, then things are perfect, and then you've hit euphoria. And the thing is I think it doesn't allow us to just show up in the messy middle of it. And I really, really don't like the idea of like you're only doing it right if you're staying up until 2 a.m. and then waking up at 4 a.m. and then, pounding it out until this time and then doing this and doing that, right? And in the same way that I don't like it when we talk about that like happiness is the end goal of your personal development movement, right? As a person, you are designed to just be happy, because it really detracts from just being able, again, like what we were saying earlier, just to be in the messy middle of it, to just show up and to have that be enough. And so the way that I always talk about it is, instead of one, desiring perfection, two, desiring happiness above all else, and then three, comparing yourself to everybody else that you think is either perfect and or happy all the time, is to desire wholeness, like wholeness above all else, to look at the grand landscape of all human emotions as equally important. And then when we do that, I think that we allow ourselves a lot more grace in the process, like a lot more grace in the process, because then we can say somebody else's path doesn't need to be mine. That goal doesn't need to be my goal. Because they go about it this way doesn't mean that that's going to be the way that I go about it, right? And then on the journey, you're going to realize that you're going to experience a lot of highs, you're going to experience a lot of lows. But just because it isn't perfect And just because it isn't the path that some guru has laid out doesn't make it any less valuable or important, because that's your path, that's your journey, and it's just as important as anybody else's.
Yeah. Again, getting to know yourself, right? Like finding that communication channel and understanding what's, what does success look like and mean to you? What does happiness mean to you? Just your own definition, right? Because sometimes we're chasing things that are not even really for us. They're just defined by somebody else. We're like, okay, that sounds good enough. I'm going to pursue that. And in reality, that's not what we need to be pursuing.
Yeah, I think oftentimes that's what we end up doing. I think we're so run by our subconscious and we don't even know it. We're so run by all of the things that everybody has planted in our heads along our story that we don't even give ourselves time to ask ourselves, like, do I even want that? Do I want to be the person that stays up until 2 a.m. and then wakes up at 4 a.m. and is, working 22 hours a day? Like, is that actually what I want? Or do I just think that that's what I should be doing? Or is that that's what I have been embedded to believe is like success, right? And it's like, that's again, it's like taking that magnifying glass to our own stories and our own histories and getting rid of all the stuff that we don't really feel is benefiting us and that we don't really feel actually matters in the long run for who we are.
Yeah, I have a friend. He wakes up at 4 a.m. and he starts his day, and then I have other friends that go to bed at 2 a.m. So I'm like, I want both. How can I get both? How can
Yeah.
I be an early riser and do a lot of things before the day even starts? And how do I stay up late to accomplish more things? That's how ridiculous it is sometimes.
Again, it's like just comparison, right? You're like, oh, but he's really killing it. He's also really killing it. So if I do both of those things, then I'm also going to kill it.
I
And
will never sleep.
yeah, I'll never sleep. And I'm going to be super healthy and super fit and super smart. And it's going to be great. That's it. That's my life.
I would love for, there's so many golden nuggets that were introduced today in this conversation, and I would love for us to maybe bring them up on surface again, just so it doesn't become like a really one inspiring conversation which people feel really good about, and they're like, that was a great podcast. I have no idea what to do next, but that was great. So maybe you can summarize like 3 things that you think are really important what we discussed today. I'll bring up a few points as well, so we can, I would love for people listening to this to walk away with something that they can start implementing right now, something that, um, you know, they may not even, that would be counterintuitive advice perhaps, because some of
Yeah.
the things that
Yeah.
we mentioned today were kind of against the mainstream advice. What do you think?
Yeah. Okay. So we can tag team this. So I think one of the first ones is that your intuitive voice is incredibly important, right? But you need to do the work to be able to separate what your intuitive voice is versus what your trauma, your unhealed wounds, and all of your conditioning are. So I think that that's something that's really important, and that's a really practical thing that you can walk away from is really starting there, because our intuitive voice is incredibly important. But if we don't learn how to hone it, I mean, we're essentially going to be asking directions from a broken compass. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah.
So I think that that's something that hopefully walking away from this conversation, a lot of people will give a lot more thought to. When I hear that inner voice, is it actually my intuition, or is it all of my conditioning and unhealed things that I haven't dealt with kind of trying to distract me from going towards, again, that true north? So
Mhm.
I would say start there for sure. That's
And to unpack a little bit that one, because it might not be like right away clear of what's the difference. To
yeah.
me, for example, my opinion of how it works is intuition is usually connected to feeling of excitement and feeling of joy. It's something that doesn't really make any sense to the mind of like, well, why am I excited about this? But something inside of you is like, oh, you should just go. It doesn't make any sense, but just go do it because there is something there, right? To me, that's how intuition guides you.
Hmm.
And I would say like the past conditioning or traumas that we've experienced in the past, they're more, there's definitely no excitement there. I think that those are usually some of the things that it's very difficult to be present for them, because I feel like if you're present, you're not really, well, most likely you won't follow this conditioning, because you'll be like, well, why am I about to do what I'm about to do? So a lot of times this happens when you're not present, and you look back later, you're like, I don't even know why I said that, like I didn't even feel that, but I said it. And that's kind of like the results of the past conditioning and past
Yeah.
traumas.
Yeah. And I think just adding on to that, I know we're supposed to be simplifying and I'm going to
I know we're like unpacking again.
but the thing is I want to really make this point, because I think that it's incredibly important as we're talking about this. Is your intuition is like, think of, let me put this in like a metaphor. So your intuition is essentially, it's like, imagine that player that on like the football field that has been sidelined for an entire season. Like, you haven't listened to them, they haven't trained, they haven't done anything, they've just been sitting there on the bench. And then when it comes time to make a big decision, all of a sudden you're going to call that player to be on the field in like the most important 15 minutes of the game. I'm going to say 99% of the time, that player is going to bite it because they haven't been practicing, right? They haven't been used the entire season. Your intuition is the same. So just because you have an intuition does not mean that it's going to be functioning perfectly if you don't hone it and use to trust it, right? So,
Mhm.
like when I say that you need to learn how to decipher them, it's not always going to be clear what your intuitive voice is saying if you haven't been practicing it and been like using it over the course of the last even 6 months or year or multiple years before that. So I would even say like start even simpler, because your intuitive voice is not always going to guide you towards the things that light you up or make you feel happy. And that's why it's going to be really important to like, okay, if I've been sidelining, if my intuition's been sitting on the bench, I need to first like get it off and like have it kick some balls around, right? Like let me just take it for a test drive a little bit. Like, and I would say start there. Reteach yourself to trust your own voice. And then that's going to be something that then you're going to be able to build on top of that. And then your intuitive voice is going to be more clear. But until you do that, it's always going to sound, as much as you don't want it to, it's always going to be a big jumbled mess.
Wonderful. Thank you. And thank you for simplifying it all, because I'm all about simplifying things, gaining as much clarity as possible, so everybody knows, what's the best route from here.
Yeah, yeah, no problem. Okay, so what's one for you?
For me, it would be do nothing.
Yeah.
If if you happen to be the person who's overwhelmed with a lot of information that's out there, and different coaches and podcasts and books and courses, maybe give it a shot doing nothing, and just being as you are. You're not going to miss out on the personal development train. Somebody's not going to be more enlightened than you are. So I think it's take a pause and connect more with yourself, and do a lot of journaling and see what actually comes out. To me, there's always has to be a healthy balance of input and output. And if there's just input and nothing is coming out, then you're just ingesting this information, but nothing is really happening. But if there's output, if you're actually sharing things, if you're sometimes when we share them with others, we hear them and we're like, oh my God, now it makes total sense. When we just consume, they kind of go into our archives, and then they just stay there, which is not so good, because then you feel like you know it, you read about it, but you act, again, like you didn't practice it. So sometimes doing that little detox and doing I would say, what is it, like a personal transformation vipassana, just go into silence for a little bit.
I love that. I love that. Okay, so the third one I would say is, give yourself permission to show up in the messy middle of it. Like perfection and full-time happiness is not the goal, wholeness is. So allow yourself to be who you are, in its entirety. And you don't have to show up as anybody but that person, no matter where on your path that you are, like you have validity and importance just as you are currently, and give yourself permission to take up space as that person.
Wonderful. Wow. This has been a very special conversation, because in a lot of previous conversations we dig deeper, we take it further, and there's like more and more, which is also very valuable. But I think we met at the right time because there is something going on, let's say in my life, but also a lot of times I notice that what's going on in my life, it goes on in other people's lives as well. And so that's why I like to connect it to my experience, because there's most likely somebody out there who's experiencing the same. And so this episode, there's a reason why we're talking about simplifying things, about turning to yourself for your own guidance, to learning to communicate with yourself. All of that is very important because it's it all starts from here. If you want to change the world, change yourself. The first step is always here, and then it's the everything else. Then the universe starts functioning. So turn inward and see what kind of answers you have there.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. And I know that when we were talking, we did say that we wanted to have a pretty simple conversation around these topics. And it was great to be able to do that because I definitely am a person that I tend to like to dive deep, 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 deep. So sometimes just floating around is also incredibly valuable, but a different way, isn't it? So I've enjoyed this a lot, Stas. Thanks.
Thank you, Rebecca. I'm sure a lot of people would love to continue this conversation with you, maybe one-on-one. And you mentioned you full-time coach. So
Yeah.
could you tell us how to connect with you and where to find you?
Yeah, absolutely. So the best place to find me is on Instagram. So I'm at rebecca.rinaldi. Super simple. And yeah, and I would love to connect with as many of you as possible over there. So I look forward to seeing y'all.
Perfect. Rebecca, thank you so much for your time. This has been amazing. And it's so cool that both of us are in Lisbon and you're like a few blocks away, but we're doing this like this. It's just pure magic. Thank you. And it's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Yeah, thanks, Dos. We'll chat soon.